Before the episode, I just wanted to give everybody a quick heads up that this interview will be split into two episodes. We went a little long, but there's a lot of amazing information and we didn't want to cut anything out. So please enjoy this interview with our guest, Michael Kochman. Welcome to Shutter and Flow. Today, we are privileged to be talking with Michael Kochman. He is an award-winning photo editor and executive creative director whose career spans some of the biggest names in media. He's worked at Paramount Pictures, spent 15 years as a photo director at Entertainment Weekly, and most recently served as the executive creative director of Warner Brothers Discovery. He's worked with some of the most iconic photographers in the industry, to name a few: Annie Leibovitz, Dan Winters, Art Schreiber, Martin Scholler, and on and on. He's probably been, and Jeremy. And he's probably been on set with any celebrity you can think of off the top of your head. And Jeremy and Michael worked together for a very long time.
I am pleased to be here with you guys.
We've both talked to you a lot, and we always really value kind of the wisdom that you bring to your thoughts around how people shoot, what their images look like, their style. You've said before that interesting photographers make interesting work. So when you're looking at portfolio work or thinking of who to hire, can you talk a little bit about what you're looking for in terms of their style or their point of view?
There are many things. When I was attracted to, let's say, a photographer via a promo card or something, and it was a new person as opposed to an established person. I liked a fresh take on portraiture. I liked an interesting use of light. I think I always keyed into sort of what was, not visually cliche. I thought that was like an important thing to like separate and distinguish. It was sometimes back in the 90s when I sort of started at the magazine, people were still shooting on film, and there was cross processing. There was using Holgas. There was just like lots of ways that you can sort of, add style to an image, because, part of what you want to do is create something unique and eye catching. I enjoyed when people had ideas in images and some visual wit. I think wit is always a compliment. Someone's witty, if someone's witty, that's a good thing. And I liked visual wit. It showed that they could be able to tell a story, because it's, what we're not shooting headshots. We're trying to tell a story about an actor or a person or a personality or even a public persona. So like, what is this person bringing to this picture that makes it interesting? So I liked style. I liked, an interesting use of, again, light or framing or composition, interesting body language, interesting use of witty props or, again, backgrounds, locations, all those things. It was just something that was fresh and that I hadn't seen before. A very important thing for me was also, since I'm dealing with celebrities for the most part, is that, like, does this person shoot pictures where people look good? You can see some guys that would try to send me work, and it would be like these, intense, harsh close-ups. And yes, they made striking images, but it wouldn't be a great fit. So, that's just some of the stuff, that I looked for. That interesting use of the technique that took these pictures to another level. I think Jeremy knows from working with me that I didn't, it's not that I didn't like quiet pictures, but I think there's lazy body language and there's interesting body language. Does the guy know how to frame a shot? Is he depending on visual cliches that demonstrate to me that he's not quite at that elevated level that the work needs to go? Is he leaning against a wall? Is the camera too low, for no reason at all, except that, you can see that that's a very dated technique. It's a lot in the details, of course, as we always talk about.
I think that your knowledge of movies, all these things go back to a certain point of everything's kind of been done for the most part, and there's nothing wrong with that. So if you take inspiration from the great films and paintings and all these different things that you can find, and you are an expert. Your knowledge of, that's one thing, just working with you, is like all the things you could find, like, oh, we should use this reference from this movie from the 50s and before that. And you can take that and bring it into the modern world, because they did it so well back then with certain, like, lens height, lens choice, all these different things. And I think that's what I've learned the most from you, is like, you can, all those tiny little details that most people be like, I'm just going to take a picture. Like, no, you're elevating it to a point with all these tiny little things that add together to make it great. So where did your movie knowledge, I mean, where did you start with that originally?
Well, I was always a fan of movies as a kid. I would watch interesting films on the public television station in New York, WNEW. So that's like when I first saw like Nosferatu and the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and stuff like that. So I was intrigued about these movies, and would read as much as I could. I was like most kids, I wasn't truly into like the stupidest stuff around. Even as a kid, I was like, I remember when I was 13, I watched The Hustler with Paul Newman, and I was really like blown away by that movie. Like, there's something about those movies that were very, beautiful, the black and white, all that stuff. So, the movie stuff came. I was always visual, but again, I didn't think I'd ever make a career out of this. Um, I was always visual, liking comic books, liking certain comic book artists. And remember, I've always told you guys, my dad was a manager in a record store, of Sam Goody stores. And I was around, album covers, iconic album covers. And that image, that like the sense of image, the sense of like, when you saw a good album cover with your guys, and it kind of blew your mind. So between Bowie and Alice Cooper and guys like that, I was really like intrigued by that stuff. So that was but more background in my mind. And honestly, I went into school as a biology major, not thinking that there was a career in a creative field. I always knew I probably wanted to express something to some degree, but I took a film studies course and it kind of opened up my brain. And I was really good at it, the analysis of movies. And, because directors, you learn in film school that like directors they're talking in a code to you. There's so many images, so much within an image, and images on top of images. And, and you learn the grammar of film. And really, the grammar of film is the grammar of photography. It's, it's, you know, long shots, close-ups, tight shots. What is the lighting doing? What is the lighting saying? Where is the camera? And, Jeremy mentioned that. It's sort of like, yeah, like, a lens choice is not arbitrary. We would talk about like deliberately shooting for a close-up as opposed to just cropping in tighter, because I think when an actor or a subject knows that it's a close-up, they act different, just like an actor. I got the close-up lens. You're just doing this, these are all like subtle things that I think added to making, just again, as Jeremy said, elevating the material a little bit beyond, the standard stuff, and sometimes quite, exceeding what that is. I think that's where it came from. So yes, movies. I was a film studies major and a pretty good one at that. And my favorite directors, again, sort of the same thing that I look for in movie in photography, which is an interesting style, but something that takes it out of everyday life. There's like something about good portrait photography that's, you're aiming to make things iconic. You're aiming to make things larger than life in your pictures, by stylizing them. And my favorite directors were the guys that, had a lot of style in their images. John Ford, Orson Welles, Scorsese. You're seeing camera movement. You're seeing camera pyrotechnics. You're seeing interesting use of lenses. A level of hyper stylization that I found really intriguing. Kubrick, gosh, great example of someone that like, you can see a Stanley Kubrick image from a mile away and know it's him, in 2 seconds. He does, these guys rely on you could say a bag of tricks. It's certainly wed to, what they do. But anyway, I think those are the foundational elements that got me going, more when I started hiring photographers. When I started at Paramount, I was really a photo editor, and at that point, I was really just clued into finding good images. I wasn't really didn't have that much to do about creating them, but I knew a good thing when I saw it. I knew a good thing to sell the story. What was this movie about? This is a good shot to run in a magazine to fill people, to tell people what this, you know, movie's about. I was very good at that, from Top Gun to Beverly Hills Cop to The Untouchables to that stuff to again later stuff. Um, I was very
Now with that,
instrumental. Yeah,
where you bring up style, and yeah, Kubrick, I mean,
yeah,
you can watch those super cuts on YouTube where people have matched up all the different movies and all the different things. It's just so
yes.
perfectly
There's a
squared
like a
all.
visual obsessiveness with the great directors, I think, and I think some of the photographers that you mentioned. I think if you had a bunch of photo experts in a room, you could tell an Avedon picture, you could tell an Irving Penn picture, you could tell a Guy Bourdin picture, you could tell a Martin Scholler picture, Annie, um, Dan Winters specifically. I think, at the highest level of that, it's pretty great that these guys have such a signature, style. And a point of view as well. It's not just like the image. There's something behind it that's a little bit deeper. I mean, Ellen von Unwerth, I'm thinking of those people that truly have like somehow luckily developed such a instantly recognizable visual mix of things. Mary Lamb
So
Mark certainly did.
once you were at a point where you were in charge of actually hiring a photographer to
Mhm.
shoot something, what was your process like a little bit? Were you more thinking of the style that you wanted and then finding a photographer that kind of matched that reference? Or was it the opposite sometimes where you just loved somebody's style and wanted to bring them in to shoot?
You know, I grew a lot when I was at EW. That was, I had worked obviously with portrait photographers doing key art at Paramount and Goldwyn. I wasn't a true hire. I was at Goldwyn. Um, uh, but I had good working relationships with some of the best unit photographers of the day. Um, and they liked working. I gave them good direction, breaking down scripts, all that sort of stuff. Um, when an assignment crossed my desk at Entertainment Weekly, it was always, matching subject matter to stuff, but there was a take. Every once in a while, like an editor or me would have an idea. This would be a fun way to do X. There are many ways to skin a cat. There's many ways to shoot. There are many viable ways. There were times that I think we shot Brian Wilson and Mike Love early on. And the photographer, someone suggested to me the photographer. I said, yeah, that's a good idea. And he didn't want to do anything based on the limitations of where we are. He really just shot kind of basic, classic, kind of Avedon like things. That worked really well for that thing. Editorial, when you're working a photo editor at a magazine, you are, you're giving, there's a little bit more power given to the photographer there. The photographers own that. The cover of the magazine, a photographer is going to do what you want. I like a typical conversation would be like this, like the editor or photo editor at Time is going to call. It's a big businessman or politician. The photographer would say, what are you thinking for the cover? Well, we had this idea. It's perfect for you, I think. And the idea is discussed. And the photographer says, I love it. That's perfect. That's great for me. Do you think we can get him to do it? And let me show you this. You like this light? The photographers say, and the photo editors say, it's a bit moody, maybe not as moody, but like pretty close. That's great. And it works out like that somehow. You do your best to sort of enhance the material, to elevate the material, and a lot of that depends on like what you're after, what the final use is. Is it a single person or, multiple people? There are photographers that don't do multiple people. So all those things force you to think differently when assigning. Is it very concept, or are we just shooting on white? No, these guys are all iconic, or they're a band. They've got crazy clothing already. Just do them. Let's just do them on seamless. There could be many, many things. Sometimes budget limitations, force you into a certain idea. So I'm throwing out a lot of different things. One thing I love to do was to sometimes hire moody photographers to shoot a moody subject. I did a great shot of Martin Landau around the time of Ed Wood, and Michael Greco photographed it. Actually, one of them won an early award for me for communication arts or American photo. But it was a very moody picture, and I think we at EW we weren't shooting just people as people. We were shooting Martin Landau, but Martin Landau flavored with Ed Wood. So we shot black and white in a moody gothic-y kind of place, and it was a beautiful picture, and it works perfectly because again, we're trying to again just align a little bit with that stuff. EW was quite good at that, and I think that's we can trace the history of shooting personas, public personas as opposed to real people. It's a very different, it's a very different thing. The whole Condé Nast Steichen style of people playing a part and finding, costuming them and, just not shooting them at home, not really quite shooting them as themselves is a fun thing.
Yeah. And I think we've dealt with this on TV shows and things where it's like,
yeah,
I've said it so many times to an actor. I'm like, okay, give me your character. Like, let me have your character persona right now when you're doing this, not you as a human being, because some actors really get into it and really become a part of it.
Agreed. Yeah.
Now, what do you think has changed in your time as far as a few things? One, obviously social media and the amount that we shoot that also is for that. But then besides that, how much more limitation have you seen or hesitation? Because you and I have dealt with it so many times where it's like, we want them to do this, but sometimes the publicist or whoever says no. But then when we've gotten directly with the person, they're like, of course, let's do that. How much have you seen that change where these people, where actors or whoever it is either want or don't want certain things to happen? Because some really want to do more because they want more stuff to put out in the world and more. So it goes both ways. But what is your overall perception of that?
A lot of times, it's look, you hire. We'll get into this a little bit more. Photographers are can be kind of master manipulators to get what you want out of people. Like directors, directors are there to sort of inspire a performance from actors and so forth. And I think photographer is there too. I don't think everyone acts at the same level. Photographing Marlon Brando, gosh, there are other stories as well. But, if you're going to photograph Marlon Brando, you're not going to get him to act like he would if he was being paid a lot of money, being directed by Elia Kazan or Coppola. They wear different hats and they go deep. They only go deep certain times and so forth. At a certain time in someone's career, they may take more chances than others. Sometimes if they knew they were shooting for certain magazines, they would take more chances for, on things for others. I think, personalities are difficult. Not everyone is an actor. Some people like to boss you around. It's a bit of a power struggle when you get on set, and who wins and so forth. You back off a little bit if someone's being, hesitant about things, and you come at it later to get them to do certain things, my bag of tricks sometimes with photographers was to not really tell them a lot of things and to slightly surprise them. As that there are publicists, there are people on set that have the power to say no. I always wanted them to say no on set or let's try it. Maybe you'll like it and you'll do it. I never thought that was like a bad way to go, with certain things. Um, Not only that, I never liked to, Jeremy knows for sure that like, obviously we went to a shoot with a plan, but I was also very much in favor of making stuff up on the spot. I never wanted to rule out the power of improv and the accidental and the thing that comes to you in a flash that's really great and unplanned for. So, those were all things that were important. You have to give credit again when you're dealing with actors that they're going to bring a lot to this. Like, and I think we'd shoot and so like I'm totally confident he'll give us plenty of stuff because you'd have marketing people. Is he going to do that? Yeah, I think he's going to do it. I was confident. Or like how is he going to, how is it? I would say he's never going to do that. Like he's already said he doesn't want to do that. You know, there's all that stuff that is discussed, you know. So how is it today differently? Oh gosh, I'm going off on a roundabout tangent. Today I think, people are open for photography. It's a little ubiquitous. I think it depends on their time of their career, their basic personalities, how much they want to give, how comfortable they are with themselves. And all those things are important things to do by a photographer and someone like me to read the room a little bit. What is the tone that you're setting? And again, all the things you do as a photographer, as a professional photographer, to make sure that you're very prepared. You've shown this person that you've thought about it by your references. This is what we're thinking. Oh, I like those. That's a great idea. You know, you could also but Jeremy, how many times we didn't get people ever? How many people do we get people that said, I don't like that idea. That's a terrible idea. I'm not
Oh, I
doing that at
mean,
all.
very rarely. And I
Very
think it was
rarely.
most of
Yeah.
the time when we were like really trying to push something as like our third option.
Yeah, and it was a little bit even it was a long shot even going in. All right, that's what we thought, but would you do this? Well, and I'll try it once. Let's see what it looks like. More often than not, I think people like not just standing there. That's like one of my main things, gosh, getting back to the early thing. If I looked at a promo and I didn't want to see someone just standing there, I wanted to see an idea in the photograph. I wanted to see a story. I wanted to see, again, that the photographer got this person to do something, in an interesting way. That showed to me that like that there was an ability to do that even more with other people. Um, so yeah, I mean that there's a lot. Yeah, there's just so many variables on a shoot at a time, that
Yeah.
go into these things.
The
But
safe,
yeah, go ahead. Go. No,
yeah,
I'm
the
sorry.
the safe shot is something that you always have to sort of sometimes get for the client, right? And then try
Yeah.
to push it outside of the box. Did you, for both of you, do you feel like getting the safe shot first takes the pressure off of the shoot so that the client's like, okay, we have what we need. Now we can play and see if we can actually find something a little more interesting here.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I think like I try to really avoid the safe. I think we'd cover things, but we do it. But, I'd be someone to say, like, we're never going to use full length shots here. Like, and that's one thing that things have changed a little bit is that, we really look at so many images on our devices and they
Mm-hmm.
have to pop and it's about faces, so I wanted to see expressions. I do think things have trended to get smaller, if anything, in your images. Um, in the glory days of magazines, you were holding, you were looking, you were seeing things. I grew up shooting covers and covers could have detail. You look at the great covers and there's a lot going on in those things. But that's because people were, holding them up and looking at them. And that whole thing changed. And now it's a easily, again, between the ADD factor of everyday life, everything on a newsstand, everything on a billboard, everything on a tile, on a phone or an app has to be a quick read. It's got to grab you. It forces you to do certain things. It forces you to make the picture interesting. It forces you to use some color. It forces you to, how do you, again, that there is a talent in paring things down to people on white, standing there to still make it interesting. There's a reason for so many years the same people do covers or the same people did movie posters, is that they know how to really kind of like reduce all the things to the bare essential and still come away with an interesting image, through a simple expression, through, again, care and wardrobe and light, an interesting light in the eyes, you know, getting people, yeah, just, I mean, more, again, making people look good, but
Hmm.
making people look good in a way that it doesn't look boring. I mean, a good photographer, you look at what Stephen Meisel does for Italian Vogue of Lana Del Rey, and they're very Irving Penn like shots. Arthur Penn with his brother. Um, but they're by Stephen Meisel, and they're beautiful, but they're like simple and perfect. And the hair and makeup, and it's detail. The hair and
Hmm.
makeup and styling are amazing. The lighting is classic, but it's not there's still a lot of nuance and a lot of detail, in it to make it again iconic and larger than life. Those are, again, lens tricks, camera angles, people angles. There's so much that goes into a simple shot that it's very deceptive. What makes a simple shot like really like
Hmm.
excellent. And again, it's a lot of things. It's, not every shot on white is good. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, I was very clear about the kind of like shots on white that I liked. I didn't like a mushy light, a dated light with, old soft boxes that just gave a softness. I wanted to, you know, be a mix of hard and soft. I liked a lot of pop in the eyes and small irises, small pupils to make the colors of eyes really pop. Um, I liked detail and hair. We did that with people. Just it made it very reflective and modern feeling. Did that with Go
Hmm.
Big Show. Remember, like, yeah, they were all wearing silver, and I said, like, we almost made a 360 lighting set. Let's flood the light because, I would notice that like something shot outdoors is beautiful, and if you shot it inside, also learned by mistakes. A photographer wants to shoot at a bar, and it's dark, and you realize, holy shit, the pictures look terrible because like there's no ambient. You got to use ambient light to like fill everything up and make everything beautiful. So like, that was a big learning thing for me. Like, oh man,
Hmm.
that bar was great. The wallpaper is good, but it's sort of like once you strobed it, it looked really kind of shitty.
Yeah, unless you're
And so you learn,
spending all day pre-lighting it and sitting in there
yeah,
and really getting each little spot just right. And look, digital cameras have helped us a lot at this point.
yeah,
It
you
can
can
do
open up a
so
lot
much more.
more. Yeah, you can use less light and get different results. But, movie light is different. It's constant and they're lighting the space. But, when you're strobing, everything's dark. So anyway, a lot of it was trial and error for me. It was a learning curve. You have, oh,
Hmm.
that's a great shot. Let's try to replicate it. But you realize that it's sometimes some of that is trickier. I got very good at executing things after a while. Like I think my level of like, oh, we're going to get this and like come away with it got very good. But that's not, like, I had things that didn't go as well. Like early on at EW, I learned, I learned the how much work I had to do and how much work the photographer had to do on a shoot to make it better. And I do think collaboration is one of those little things, little X factors of what I looked for in a constant partner in a way was how well they collaborate because not every photographer is an idea machine and I'm not always an idea machine, so I
Yes,
want
you
someone
are.
that's going to bring something to life. I want the photographer to bring this idea to life. I can't do that. He can do that, like from his energy and the way he shoots. Jeremy has great energy on set of getting people upbeat and fun. I want that to be communicated. Um, it's like a piece of music. If it's played poorly, it's not the same as it being played well. And I think, that would be a thing, and I'm talking to marketing execs. Oh, the so and so photographer will bring that to life. He'll get that. It'll be a billion times better than the sketch, or she, or whatever.
Well, and I
Um,
think that that's what a lot of people don't realize on some of these shoots for key art or
mhm,
move or magazine covers, all these different things. A lot of people don't realize how limited our time is when we're doing those. And we're either sharing it with, lately, it's been more and more of like during a production day. So
mhm,
they're shooting in the next studio over for the show or the movie or whatever it is. And we have them for a brief period of time,
mhm.
and productions are always off, or it's a junket day where they're doing interviews nonstop and all these different things. And you have to kind of, the preparation between, it was you and I at that point and whoever else, but like you have to know exactly what you're doing. Cause look, we've had times where we had talent for 5 minutes and
Mhm.
you have to get the key art for the show, a PR shot, all these different things. So you taught so well of like, have a V flat with all the references ready to go.
Mhm.
So when the person walks in, you're like, hey, here's what we're going to do. Because sometimes, back to the question you asked, Edward, sometimes you have the exact shots that they want to use for the poster. They've already decided this. It is, we need
Yeah.
these
Yeah,
photos
there's
to
no
be.
argument. It's been
Mhm.
sold to the producers. They're expecting that. The stars may even have said about, you saw these, right? Yeah, we sent it. Yeah, yeah, I know what you want to get here. You know.
Yeah. So I think that happens some of the times. And then sometimes it doesn't. If the show's early on, we did pilot episodes where they're not even sure what the show is yet,
Mhm.
100%. And we have to kind of go in there and take what knowledge we know and the marketing team and make it work. Um, so I think it's just
I used to love
preparation.
that too sometimes, but preparation is so important. You can't be, too prepared. You know, um, again, you don't want to be. Can you be over prepared? No. I mean, I do think like production falls into this a little bit, and I think I learned a lot on my prior things that I brought to the Turner about being prepared in a properly a different way, multiple lighting setups, especially since we had our own studio. Let's just go to A to B to C to D. Let's just do it this way. This is more efficient, you know. Um, because look, partially as a creative person, you're there to give them a lot of options. You're not there. You can't walk away with one thing. Editorial, you might get one thing. If you're shooting again, a notorious business person, hey, Martin Short will tell the story of having 10 frames to shoot Ted Turner, and he counted
Mhm.
down as he did them,
I've
and
heard
he's
this
shooting
story.
film, and you have to get it, and you don't have time for multiple setups. Maybe every once in a while, I know Martin would sometimes just like, can I promise one more? It'll take 1 minute. Let me do it, and he would do it, or hold this prop, which would be which would be, let me put the rat on your shoulder for like 1-2 frames. Martin Schuller just shot Ozzy, and I think some of the pictures that he did for Rolling Stone are floating around on Instagram and things. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of communication. There's a lot of preparation. It's execution. It's being well produced. It's you know. I have several adages. One of them was like the kind of the less work I have to do on a photo shoot, the better it's going, in a way, which just shows that we've rehearsed well, we've thought about it well, we're not confused, we're all aligned. If I'm at war with the photographer, which has happened, and I'm not really war, but stubbornness, not listening, and again, that happened less at a gallery shoot, maybe way more on editorial, where it's like, no, I don't want to do that. You know, it's like, I'm doing what I want here. I gave you your cover. No, I'm doing this. I don't care.
I know exactly
You
who you're
know.
talking about for the record.
Oh, I don't
I'm
know
not
who
going to say
that.
any names, but I can figure it out.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe a different one, but yeah. I mean, on a gallery shoot, there are things. I mean, and you learn to trust your gut instincts as a creative about what's going to work and what's not. But yeah, again, the preparation goes back to the research and doing your homework on the people. Um, I would, if I was shooting actors or actresses, I would research prior photos, prior covers, prior things that were done for them, prior TV shows to see like what angle people are being shot at. What's their favorite side? Oh, look, everyone's being shot, they're always shooting her from her right side. And these comps have her from the left side. I bet you she doesn't look good that way. So we're going to have to like retool things. That's one level of preparation, but it's just like the level of inspiration. I always had a lot of books. I always had a lot of film books and things like that. When I started working at EW and I would meet with some higher end photographers and go to their office, like meet with someone like Matthew Ralston or Moshe Bracha, excuse me, they had walls of photo books, art books, illustration books, comic books, just collections, anthologies. This is before Toshin, but just tons of, books about architecture and things. I mean, gosh, and they would reuse that to if you're shooting someone and you want to do them in a retro mod style, 60 style, let's do Heather Graham, like she's from the 1960s. You want to look at historical pictures to really get the references right, to get the color right to the pictures. You don't want to shoot a certain way. Oh, they didn't shoot that way. Some people took the mimicry and the parody very, very very closely. I mean, look, Tarantino's like that, when he's going to do a scene that goes back to the 50s, he's shooting it in the proper aspect ratio and the same type of lighting, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Or even, the Kill Bill movies when he goes back to doing some of the Hong Kong Kung Fu spoofs, he's shooting it exactly that way. He's making the pictures grainy. He's probably blowing it up from 16, scratching the
Push the
film,
push-ins and all of that
the
stuff. It's
push-ins, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, mimicking the style, and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, because there is, if you're gonna do the Brady Bunch light, you're gonna light it like with a hair light that's old. There's like so many little bits of trick to do your research. And again, I was a very good reverse engineer about all that sort of stuff. I could look at something and it's like, this is how he's doing it. Or even working with Martin Scholler, shooting Hugh Jackman recreating a scene from Chinatown. I was very sort of like, that's being shot from street lamps. So we had lights high up, strobes, but they were mimicking like, sodium vapor lamps or, real street lamps. You have to fill a little bit, you have to cheat, but you understand lighting. So getting back to film, understand lighting, I think is so key because like, lighting, another one of my sayings, lighting is your cheapest prop to tell a story. And I do think like the great photographers were masters with light. They were masters with the dark room, but they were masters with light. And it wasn't simple. Like it was a very intricate mixture of modifiers and things. It's not to say that you needed a lot of light, but I think they all had their own tricks and their own formulas, and it's not just the light, it's camera height, it's lens choice, it's distance from subject. It's like,
Atmosphere.
yeah, atmosphere, yeah, it's all that stuff. Fill, there again a billion variables. And I was on shoots and like I would see people do things and they would never do the same. No one would do the same thing in a way. And that's how they made everything their own a little bit, because how do you get that signature style, and, Martin Scholler is one, Annie was one. They did tons of lighting tests in those days, um, trying out different films and stocks and processes and lenses and, what's it doing. And I think really, really understanding it, really, really well. Um, one other thing, again, so like, yeah, we talk about other like necessary things that are for people to do, but there's visual problem solving, that becomes like a big thing. How do we do something, if someone doesn't want to do this, how are we still going to do this? Or how do we, again, how do we make this better? Um,
So when
all that stuff.
you obviously worked with so many big names, people that were already well established.
Hmm.
When you were working with somebody that was a little bit newer, maybe somebody you just hadn't worked with before, even if they were a big name, what did you take away from working with them maybe the first time that would kind of sort of a pass fail, what would you see that you would say, oh, I really want to work with this person again, or maybe I don't want to work with this person again?
Um, Early on in my EW time, uh, w- w- you could shoot small pictures in the back of the book that literally would run on the page. You know, I have a magazine, but literally could be a question and answers with Andy Dick, for lack of a better,
Hmm.
word. And the picture's running this big, on the page, and you could have some fun with it. And there was always the opportunity for the picture to run at a different place in the magazine if they really liked it. Like the table of contents page was held for like a fun picture from a shoot that week that was fun. So we always shot for those things. Um, but I have to say, like, partially was personality. If I met, I think like photographers with good personalities got personality out of subjects. So I would see a promo card, I would really like the picture, and then I'd be on set and the photographer had zero personality. And that like bothered me. And I didn't think, and like some people need a nudge, some people, need that goose from the photographer to get that sort of stuff. So I started learning that it was like so much, yeah, I like that picture, but there's another factor here that I'm not thinking about. And when I hired people that were really good, like they were really good with the subjects. Um, and they had a great personality, and I think the people felt comfortable. And the trick was to get something natural and authentic from these people, and other people might have been nervous or whatever, but and other people weren't. And I mean, I would hire people to shoot celebrities from promos that I got that just featured family members. And then there would be people that would send me promo cards where they were had the opportunity to shoot some celebrities, but the pictures were awful. And I would sooner hire the person who shot their grandmother in an interesting way because I liked the style and I just liked the wit and the openness, and it felt modern, you know. Catherine Ledner was somebody that I worked with early at EW that I think just graduated at Art Center. From Art Center, I got her promo and I gave her a shot, and everybody loved it. She went on to shoot so many people and had a fun way. She wasn't really a studio photographer. She would shoot Phyllis Diller at home and get her to do something silly. She was great. I mean, there were so many. Again, my mind is blanking with some, but there were so many opportunities. But I think it was a personality thing. Are they fun? Also, are they fun to work with for me?
Hmm.
Were they, some people were serious. Some people, yeah, I didn't want, super serious. I didn't, it, we all bond or have a natural like or dislike to people, on meeting. This person's for me. This person's not for me, or whatever. And I think those relationship things are, so key to getting hired. Obviously, why do certain people hire certain people? They have a good working relationship. Why do certain directors work with certain actors? They have a good relationship. You have a good thing, you want to go back to that well over and over again and mine it. Um,
Yeah, I think you're going to
Sometimes,
be spending a
yeah,
lot of time together on some of these things. And it's like
yeah,
there's times where you're sitting around all day waiting and things get
yeah.
changed. And it's like
Is this
you're spending time together. So you want someone you want to spend time with that's also going to deliver.
who's going to deliver? Yeah, the execution was a really big thing. Could they visually problem solve? Could they, could they think quickly, this is not working, let me move it over here, and then really do amazing from that pivot. Not all of them are like that, but some of them are great. But I do, I like someone to be a self-starter. I mean, I think Jeremy knows, we were on sets and like, again, I'm there as a presence, but I let Jeremy drive when he's there. He'll look at me. Are we good to move on? Sure. But Jeremy's taking the pictures. He's talking to the people. I trust him to get that. And we worked on some great stuff, over the years. But
I think the
yeah,
preparation, once again, going back to it, is like we did so much preparation leading up to it that we were both on the same page and comfortable. By the time we're actually taking the photo, we know, without, unless something totally changes out of nowhere, we know what we're going to do, at
Yeah.
least
We've
pretty
kind of
closely.
discussed it. We've kind of
Yeah.
discussed it. This is going to be on this set. Let's just use this lens, or let's crop it this way. We worked it out. I was never one to shoot it a billion different ways and let's hope for the best. I like giving people a lot for their money, but I don't know. I'm pretty proud that like a lot of things that I made up at, for the Turner Networks would end up being key art when it wasn't even planned to be key art. They like that better than the sketch and such. And I thought that was good because I would make it up within the boundaries. I would do something honestly that was more like an EW cover than like key art. Sometimes key art to me could be very, gallery stuff had a bad connotation in a way. It's sometimes very stiff and very predictable. Stand this way, stand that way, do the same thing in a medium shot, do the same thing in a close up. And that to me is not photography. I would conceive of them a little bit differently. To make it more interesting for everybody all around, like I'm glad we're not just doing that stuff. Like this is cool, I like this, you know. Hey, look, I mean, digital photography has made possible many different things that film couldn't do. Like first off, I think these days with photography, you can be very fast in 5 minutes because you're seeing it right there. When you
Hmm.
had to shoot on film and then pray that it was going to come out the next day, now you can really see it. And if you get it after 10 frames, you're golden. We got it. We're not going to get better than this. Let's just move on.